The sun had barely risen over the quiet suburban neighborhood, but already the air crackled with tension. Sarah clutched the tattered flyer in her hand, its bold text searing into her eyes. Nadi Borhod BBQ, EVER Mwani Welsto Ami. She stormed through her backyard, past the neatly trimmed hedges and the gleaming grill waiting to be fired up. Marching up to the wooden fence, she pounded on the weathered planks. Karen. I know you're in there, Sarah shouted, her voice quivering with a mix of anger and disbelief. How dare you try to shut down our family BBQ? The fence door swung open, revealing Karen's pinched face, her lips pursed in a disapproving frown. I'm simply enforcing the HOA guidelines, Sarah, she said, her tone dripping with self-righteousness. No unapproved gatherings are allowed without a permit. Sarah's eyes narrowed. But the mayor is coming to our BBQ today. You can't just. Karen's hand shot up, silencing her. I'm afraid the mayor's visit is irrelevant. The rules apply equally to everyone. Her gaze swept over Sarah's backyard, her lip curling in disdain. Besides, your setup is an eyesore. It's simply unacceptable. Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest, the blood rushing to her face. This is our home, Karen. We have the right to. Not according to the HOA covenants you signed, Karen interrupted, her fingers tightening around the fence door. If you insist on going through with this, I'll have no choice but to issue a cease and desist order. And you know what that means. Sarah's mind raced, her options dwindling. She knew the consequences of defying the HOA, fines, legal action, even the threat of losing their home. But the thought of canceling the BBQ, especially with the mayor coming, was unthinkable. This isn't over, Karen, she said through gritted teeth, her grip on the flyer crumpling. I won't let you ruin this for my family. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed back toward the house, her mind whirling with a desperate plan to save the day. Sarah burst through the back door, her eyes scanning the kitchen where her husband, John, was sipping his morning coffee. We've got a problem, she said, her voice laced with urgency. Karen is trying to shut down the BBQ. John's brow furrowed in confusion. But the mayor is coming today. Surely she can't. Oh, she can. Sarah interrupted, her fingers gripping the kitchen counter. She's threatening to issue a cease and desist order if we don't cancel the whole thing. John's face fell. That would be a disaster. The mayor's visit is the biggest thing to happen in this town in years. We can't just. I know, Sarah said, cutting him off. But we have to do something. If we defy the HOA, we could be fined or even lose the house. John took a deep breath, his fingers drumming against the countertop. Okay, let's think this through. There has to be a way to make this work without Karen ruining everything. Sarah's eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope. What if we get the mayor involved? Maybe he can reason with Karen or even override the HOA rules for the day. John nodded, his expression brightening. It's worth a shot. I'll call the mayor's office right away and see if we can arrange a meeting. As John hurried toward the living room to make the call, Sarah felt a surge of determination. She wasn't going to let Karen ruin this day, not when the mayor was coming, and not when it meant so much to her family. The sound of John's voice echoed through the house, and Sarah held her breath, silently praying that their plan would work. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the backyard as Sarah paced back and forth, her eyes fixed on the driveway. John stood beside her, his hands shoved nervously into his pockets. They should be here by now, Sarah murmured, her brow furrowed with worry. What if the mayor's office couldn't arrange a meeting with Karen? John placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I'm sure everything will be fine. The mayor knows how important this is to the community. Just then, a sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway, and Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. The mayor himself stepped out, flanked by two of his aides, and Sarah rushed to greet him. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for coming, she said, her voice trembling with relief. "We're so grateful you could take the time to." Of course, the mayor interrupted, his handshake firm and reassuring. "I know how much this neighborhood BBQ means to all of you. Now, where's this Karen character I need to talk to?" Sarah led the mayor and his aides through the backyard, past the neatly arranged tables and the sizzling grill, to the wooden fence. She could already hear Karen's shrill voice echoing from the other side. "This is unacceptable," Karen was shouting. "I've given you fair warning, and now I have no choice but to." The mayor cleared his throat, and Karen's words died on her lips. "Mrs. Sinclair, I'm sure we can find a reasonable solution here," he said, his tone diplomatic but firm. Karen's eyes widened, and she quickly straightened her blouse. "Mr. Mayor, I had no idea you were coming today. I was just trying to shut down a community event," the mayor interrupted, his brow raised in disapproval. "That's not very neighborly of you, is it?" Karen's face flushed with embarrassment, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. But as the mayor and Karen began to negotiate, she knew the battle was far from over. The tension in the backyard was palpable as the mayor and Karen continued their heated discussion. Sarah and John watched nervously, their fingers crossed that the mayor would be able to sway the stubborn HOA president. "You see, Mrs. Sinclair, this neighborhood BBQ is an important tradition for the community," the mayor said, his tone firm but measured. "I can't simply allow you to cancel it, especially with my own visit planned." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing. "But the HOA guidelines clearly state that any large gatherings must be approved in advance. And I'm afraid I can't make an exception, even for you, Mr. Mayor." The mayor raised a hand, silencing her. "I understand your concerns, but this is a special circumstance. Surely we can find a compromise that satisfies everyone." Sarah held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see the gears turning in Karen's mind, her fingers tapping against the wooden fence as she contemplated the mayor's words. Finally, Karen let out a long, exasperated sigh. "Well, I suppose we could allow the BBQ to proceed, but with some additional restrictions," she said, her tone dripping with reluctance. The mayor nodded, his expression cautiously optimistic. "I'm listening. The setup must be confined to the Johnsons' backyard, and no more than 50 guests are allowed," Karen said, her fingers tightening around the fence door. "And they'll need to obtain a noise permit to ensure the festivities don't disturb the rest of the neighborhood." Sarah felt a surge of relief, but she knew better than to let her guard down. "And what about the mayor's visit? Surely you can't restrict that," she said, her voice laced with concern. Karen's lips curled into a smug smile. "Of course not. The mayor's visit will be allowed, but only for a maximum of 1 hour. After that, the event must conclude." The mayor considered the terms for a moment, then nodded. "I believe that's a fair compromise. Sarah, John, are you willing to agree to those conditions?" Sarah and John exchanged a glance, their eyes locked in silent communication. They both knew it wasn't the ideal outcome, but at least the BBQ would be able to go on as planned. "Yes, we agree," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and resignation. Karen's smile widened, and she released her grip on the fence door. "Very well. I'll be sure to monitor the event to ensure everything is in order." As the mayor and his aides headed back to their car, Sarah felt a sense of dread wash over her. She knew that Karen would be watching their every move, ready to pounce on the slightest infraction. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. The afternoon sun beat down on the Johnsons' backyard as the community members began to arrive, their faces alight with excitement and anticipation. Sarah and John had worked tirelessly to ensure everything was in order, from the neatly arranged tables to the perfectly grilled burgers and hot dogs. But as the guests started to filter in, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Her eyes kept drifting to the wooden fence, where she knew Karen was lurking, ready to pounce on any perceived misstep. Relax, honey, John said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We've got this under control. The mayor is here, and Karen has to play by the rules. Sarah nodded, trying to push down the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. As the mayor arrived, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Sarah felt a sense of pride and relief wash over her. But just as the mayor was about to deliver his speech, a familiar voice cut through the din. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you all to keep it down, Karen said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The noise permit only allows for moderate noise levels, and you're clearly in violation. The crowd murmured in disbelief, and Sarah felt her blood boil. She stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. Karen, this is ridiculous. The mayor is here, and we're all having a perfectly reasonable celebration. You can't just. I'm afraid I can, Karen interrupted, her eyes narrowing. The rules are the rules, and I intend to enforce them to the letter. The mayor stepped forward, his brow furrowed in frustration. Mrs. Sinclair, I must insist that you allow this event to proceed as planned. We've already reached a compromise, and... A compromise that is clearly being violated, Karen snapped, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. I have no choice but to issue a cease and desist order. Chaos erupted as the guests began to shout and protest, their voices mingling with the increasingly loud music and laughter. Sarah felt a sense of desperation wash over her, her mind racing to find a way to salvage the day. But as she watched Karen stride away, her lips curled in a triumphant smile, Sarah knew that the battle had been lost. The HOA Karen had won, and there was nothing she could do to stop her. The dream of a perfect community BBQ had turned into a nightmare, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder what other surprises the day had in store. The backyard erupted in a chorus of outrage as Karen's words sank in. Neighbors who had been laughing and chatting just moments ago were now shouting and waving their fists in the air, their faces twisted with anger and disbelief. Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the scene unfold. She knew that Karen was relishing every second of the chaos, her eyes gleaming with a twisted sense of satisfaction. This is unacceptable. One of the guests, a burly man with a thick beard, bellowed. We've been planning this BBQ for months, and you're just going to shut it down. Karen raised a hand, silencing the crowd. I'm simply enforcing the rules, as I'm required to do as the HOA president, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you take it up with the HOA board. The mayor stepped forward, his face flushed with frustration. Mrs. Sinclair, I must insist that you reconsider. This event is important to the community and... I'm afraid my decision is final, Mr. Mayor, Karen interrupted, her expression hardening. Unless you can produce a written exemption from the HOA covenants, I have no choice but to shut this down. Sarah felt a sense of desperation wash over her as she watched the mayor's face fall. She knew that the chances of the HOA board overriding Karen's decision were slim to none, and the thought of losing this cherished community event was almost too much to bear. Just as the crowd was about to erupt into a full-blown riot, a familiar voice rang out from the back of the group. Wait, I have an idea. All eyes turned to Sarah as she pushed her way through the throng of angry neighbors. Her face was flushed, but her eyes were alight with determination. What if we move the BBQ to the community center? She said, her voice trembling with hope. That way, we can still celebrate, but without violating any of the HOA rules. The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement, and even the mayor's expression brightened. That's an excellent idea, Sarah, he said, clapping his hands together. Let's get this show on the road. As the guests began to gather their belongings and follow Sarah toward the community center, Karen's face twisted with a mix of fury and disbelief. This isn't over, you know, she shouted, her voice echoing across the backyard. I'll be watching, and the first sign of trouble, I'll... But her words were drowned out by the excited chatter of the crowd, who were already making their way to the community center, determined to salvage the day's festivities. Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph as she led the way, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The battle with Karen may have been won, but she knew that the war was far from over. The community center was alive with energy as the guests filed in, their faces alight with renewed excitement. Sarah and John worked quickly to set up the tables and fire up the grill, determined to make the most of their impromptu relocation. As the mayor took the makeshift stage, the crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on him with rapt attention. "My friends," the mayor began, his voice resonating through the spacious hall, "I'm so proud to be here with all of you today, celebrating the spirit of this wonderful community." A round of cheers and applause erupted, and the mayor raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "Now, I know we've had a bit of a hiccup with our original plans," he continued, "but thanks to the quick thinking and hard work of Sarah and John, we're able to continue our celebration in this fantastic space." More applause filled the air, and Sarah felt a swell of pride as the mayor's gaze found her in the crowd. "So let's raise a glass to our community, to our neighbors, and to the unshakable spirit that brings us all together, even in the face of adversity." The guests erupted in a chorus of cheers and laughter, and Sarah found herself swept up in the infectious energy of the moment. As the mayor stepped down from the stage and made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging warm embraces, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. But just as she was beginning to relax, a familiar face appeared at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed over her chest, and her lips pursed in a disapproving frown. "This isn't over, you know," Karen hissed, her eyes narrowed to slits. "I may have allowed you to move the event, but that doesn't mean I'm going to let you off the hook that easily." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, and she instinctively stepped in front of John, shielding him from Karen's icy gaze. "What do you want, Karen?" she asked, her voice laced with a hint of defiance. "I want you to understand that you're playing a dangerous game," Karen replied, her tone dripping with venom. "The rules of this community don't simply disappear just because you found a way around them." Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest, but she refused to back down. "We're not breaking any rules, Karen. We've followed your ridiculous restrictions to the letter, and—" "That's where you're wrong," Karen interrupted, her lips curling into a sinister smile. "I've been watching, and I can assure you that there are plenty of violations just waiting to be discovered." Sarah felt a cold dread settle in the pit of her stomach as Karen's words sank in. She knew that the HOA president was relentless, and that she would stop at nothing to assert her authority over the community. But as she looked around at the smiling faces of her neighbors, all gathered together in a spirit of celebration and unity, Sarah felt a surge of determination coursing through her veins. "Go ahead and try, Karen," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "But this community is stronger than your petty rules and regulations. We won't be bullied or intimidated, no matter what you do." With that, Sarah turned on her heel and rejoined the festivities, leaving a seething Karen in her wake. The battle may have been far from over, but Sarah was more determined than ever to protect the spirit of her community, no matter what it took. As the sun began to set, the community center was filled with the sounds of laughter, music, and the sizzle of grilling burgers and hot dogs. Sarah and John moved through the crowd, greeting their neighbors and basking in the sense of camaraderie that filled the air. Despite the earlier confrontation with Karen, the mood was one of triumph and celebration. The guests had rallied together, determined to make the most of the impromptu relocation, and the energy was palpable. As the mayor made his way through the crowd, stopping to chat with everyone he encountered, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude. "This is exactly what our community is all about," the mayor said, his eyes shining with admiration. "The way you all came together to save this event is a testament to the spirit of this neighborhood." Sarah felt her cheeks flush with pride. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We couldn't have done it without your support." The mayor placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression sincere. "Don't sell yourself short, Sarah. You and your family have been the heart and soul of this community for years. This is your victory, not mine." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat as the mayor's words sank in. She had always known that her family was an integral part of the neighborhood, but to have the mayor himself acknowledge it was truly humbling. As the mayor moved on to greet other guests, Sarah turned to John, her eyes shining with emotion. "Can you believe this, John?" she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. "We did it. We saved the BBQ, and the mayor is here to celebrate with us." John pulled her into a warm embrace, his own eyes glistening with tears. "I never doubted you for a second, Sarah. You're the strongest, most determined person I know." Sarah buried her face in John's chest, letting the warmth of his embrace wash over her. For a moment, the world seemed to fade away, and all that mattered was the love and support of her family and her community. But just as she was beginning to relax, a familiar voice cut through the revelry, shattering the moment. "Well, well, well, look who's having a grand old time." Sarah and John turned to see Karen standing at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed over her chest and a smug grin plastered across her face. "I told you this wasn't over, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "And I'm here to make sure you keep your end of the bargain." Sarah felt a surge of anger rise within her. But before she could respond, the mayor stepped forward, his brow furrowed in concern. "What seems to be the problem, Mrs. Sinclair?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. Karen's gaze shifted to the mayor, and for a moment, her confidence seemed to waver. I'm simply here to ensure that the event is being conducted in accordance with the HOA guidelines," she stammered, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. The mayor's expression hardened, and he took a step closer to Karen, his presence commanding and imposing. "I see," he said, his voice low and measured. "Well, I can assure you that Sarah and her family have gone above and beyond to comply with your restrictions. If you have any further concerns, I suggest you take them up with me directly." Karen's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to protest, but the mayor held up a hand, silencing her. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I have some more mingling to do," he said, his lips curling into a faint smile. As the mayor turned and walked away, Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph. Karen stood there, her face flushed with embarrassment, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't over, Sarah," she hissed, her eyes narrowed to slits. "Mark my words, I'll be watching, and the first time you step out of line." "Save it, Karen," Sarah interrupted, her voice steady and confident. "We've played by your rules, and will continue to do so. But don't think for a second that we're going to let you bully us into submission. This community is ours, and we're not going anywhere." With that, Sarah turned and rejoined the festivities, leaving a seething Karen in her wake. The battle may have been won, but she knew that the war was far from over.